Tēnā koe te tuakana, ko whai wā ki te kōrero ki au. Mō I tēnei ata, just a little mihi to you in te reo Māori about making yourself free and available to speak to us about your story. I was going to start with, oh my gosh, where do I even begin with your book? It's actually incredible. But perhaps we start at the beginning, when in the book you wrote, as a child you often felt too big, not physically, but maybe spiritually or personality-like. Mm-hmm. Tell me what that was like.
I was a really strange child, and now I understand that I really was a strange child, but back then, I mean, all we know is who we are. I came into this body and this life and this world really aware of nature, not as something separate from me, but something that I was and was inside me and I was inside it. So for me, the birds and the trees and the wind were all my friends, and I would talk to them and they would talk back, and there was nothing unusual about that. But then to go to school where that isn't normal, the feedback that I would get from the greater world was that I was strange, weird, too much, too big, too loud. I was definitely, I've always felt like I've had three people's energy in my body, and I've spent my whole life learning how to contain it and channel it and be able to dance with it without sort of like destroying my life, without burning down the house.
What did it mean for relationships in your childhood?
My family was everything. My family was a haven, they were a home, they never made me feel like I was too big, too much, too strange. I think, you know, my parents, I was the first one, and so they didn't know any different. And then the other two came along. Mum and Dad had 3 under 3. So they were really busy, and we just used to just romp and play, and we had this wild free-range childhood, and it was full of animals and books and family picnics and romping around Jervis Bay. And so home was full of relationships that were really nourishing. And then I would go to school, which was the only other place really that as a kid you've got your home life and you've got your school life, and then from your school life you end up with a social life. But I was so odd that I didn't have any friends all the way through primary school at all. I had none. And so my school life was very, it was lonely in terms of human connection, but it wasn't lonely because I would climb a tree and talk to the magpies, or I would lie in the grass and talk to the clouds. Or when I found books, the characters in books became my friends.
That relationship with nature, does that continue to be your primary relationship?
I would say it underpins everything. I would say that relationship with nature is so integral to my sense of identity that the relationships that I have with people are part of my relationship with nature. So they're an offshoot of that. These days though, I've kind of learned how to human, and I enjoy humaning, and as long as it's real, as long as there is a connection that feels intimate and that people aren't sort of like full of 17 faces that I've got to find my way through to find out who they are, then I love it. I love interacting with people, but I'm also a really big introvert, and I use extroversion. I use all this personality to be able to human, but to kind of balance, I really need to go out into nature and silence and stillness and a horizon and stars and a fire and no music and no TV, and just like that, you know, that silence that you get when you're really out in nature and you can't even hear another human humming, you know, you can't even hear them thinking. That's the kind of silence that I always come back to.
This is a memoir, and it's described as a magic carpet ride through an exquisite mystery of the human heart. What did you learn about your heart when you were riding your magic carpet?
I learned that my heart has a lot of capacity, and memoirs are interesting. Because how do you condense a life? Like, how do you actually sort of go, all right, here's all of the life, and now here are the bits that are going to weave together into a story that other people are going to find interesting or useful. Because a lot of the things that we find fascinating about ourselves, other people, you know, it's like someone telling you their dreams. You know, someone's dreams are like, oh my goodness, I had this dream about this snake and it did this, and then you're like, oh God, oh, okay, yeah. So
it's like, what do you put in and what do you leave out?
What do you put in and what do you leave out? So for me, lives don't make sense looking forwards. They only make sense looking backwards. It's only when we look backwards that we can see the patterns and we can see why we did things. And again, for me, the reason we do something is never the reason we actually did it. It's just the thing that our ego kind of like dangles in front of us to get us there. And it's only weeks or months or even years later that we can see the reason we actually did the thing. So writing a memoir was a really beautiful way for me to explore that and really see that something that might be a tragedy at the time actually is a doorway to a whole new way of being, and something that might be a triumph at the time might actually be the beginning of a darker road that leads to wisdom. So I really loved finding those threads so that the seeds that were planted in childhood then took roots in adolescence, and then grew stems and leaves in my 20s, and then grew fruit in my 30s, and then in my 40s and 50s that fruit gets to be harvested. So there was a huge discipline that was required to be able to take out anything that wasn't actually part of that forest.
And that's the way that you have written the memoir. It's linear, really, because it's from the beginning and all the way through. Yeah. And actually, it's the year of 33, the year of 37. I love that. But I think that you described it the best when you said this: that your heart, what you learnt about your heart, is the capacity it has for, is it feeling, for holding, for enduring, all those things. And I wondered, so we talked about that early life where you struggled a little bit with humaning, as you call it, with young kids. There was actually an awful moment that I can't get out of my head. It's when you had a boyfriend and you went to the swimming hole. Do you want to talk about that one?
Oh, yes. So there was this beautiful weird boy in my year at school, and he courted me by, when I'd be reading, because I had no friends, he'd sort of sneak up behind me and throw a packet of Cheezels or a packet of Twisties into my lap, and that was the way he courted me, bless. And we ended up being boyfriend and girlfriend, and we'd like hang out and look at insects under our bug catchers and look at the stars. And it was the last day of year 6, so I was 11, 12 years old, probably was I 12, I think. And I was just growing these tiny little buddy boobs, the little nipples that turned into these really painful buddy boobs, and there wasn't anything there except a little lump. And I didn't wear swimming tops, I didn't wear bikini tops, because I didn't think I needed them. I looked like a boy. I wanted to be a boy. And at this particular end of year 6, end of primary school excursion, we went to a river and had a picnic as the whole year was there. And I took off my, my uniform or whatever, and I had my bikini bottoms on, and I ran around to make a dam, expecting that this boy who was my boyfriend would come and join me, and he didn't. And I was very confused and didn't understand why. And then one of his friends came and told me, as I was eating a pail of snails that I'd cooked up on a little fire, he told me that I was dropped because I wasn't wearing a top, because because you've got to wear a top now because you've got boobs. And I'm like, I don't have boobs. But yeah, that was devastating.
And so that's probably the beginning. Do you is that where the heart starts to have to process different kinds of feelings? Do you think? Because as young girls, we all remember being dropped, and it's actually devastating. Yeah. It's so tiny. We don't even remember the person that well anymore, but we remember the moment.
Yeah, the moment where we were dropped. Absolutely. I think because I was bullied so much as well, I was being dropped a lot. But this was the first time I really had someone who felt like outside my family or outside my family friends, he was mine. He was my person, and he understood me. So to have him just kind of glaze over and pretty much ghost me, which I now understand. He was embarrassed. He was in front of, however many 100 kids of our peers, and his girlfriend's got little boobs and no top on. Like, of course he's just going to go, ah. But yeah, what the rejection and the abandonment of that has certainly stayed with me. And I do think that is the beginning of that sort of yearning for connection with other, but also the fraught nature of the rejection that can come with that.
And your mum said to you that one day you would find your people, and you did. You shifted to the city.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about that period of time. It's pretty full on in the book, and there's lots of yearning for acceptance and love, and I guess that's when your heart goes through a different period of time.
Yeah. So after school, I went to Sydney to go to university, and I ended up in the gay scene, the queer scene in Australia on Oxford Street in the 90s. And it was like Studio 54. It was this unbelievable riot of life and colour and light and celebration of difference and sexuality. And I was exploring my own sexuality as well. And I found in the queer community pure acceptance of all of the parts of me that had been rejected pretty much my whole life.
The three personalities.
The three energies in one. It wasn't so much three personalities.
The three energies.
Yeah.
The big you.
All of the different parts that were kind of like expressing themselves, constantly and without filters and without understanding of social cues. But in the gay scene, in the queer scene, I found a home, and I also found dancing. So I became like a regular podium dancer. And what that would mean is I would imbibe whatever chemicals were required to keep me awake for the whole night. And then I would go and get on a podium and I would dance for 8 hours sometimes. And I wasn't interested in the chemicals for the chemical's sake. It was more because it would mean that I could dance non-stop for 8 hours, and I wouldn't stop until the lights came on. Yeah.
And that period of your life, obviously you got to be yourself, but also it came with some harsh lessons. And we're kind of building up to, most people will know you for the woman that won Alone in Australia Outback, where you had to go and be by yourself and survive for the longest period of time. So we're building up to that period of your time where you decided to go off and do that, and what got you there. Do you think that period in your late 20s and 30s helped to build you, to strengthen you to be there?
Absolutely. So I've been through some pretty massive things in my life, and later on I would go through huge personal tragedy. But what happened in my late 20s, I would say, is more traumatic, because in my late 20s I fell in love with a con man. And I did it the way I do everything, which is all of me. So I just threw myself into this relationship and this belief and this faith in the words of a man who was telling me everything I wanted to hear. I was the prey that went out to the wolf and went, "Hello, Wolfie, you look fun." And Wolfie went, "Arr." And so I took myself so deeply into the belief in somebody's words when my instincts were actually telling me otherwise, that I completely crashed my life. Completely, 100% bankrupted myself mentally, physically, spiritually, financially, sexually, almost lost my life in the process. But the beautiful gift of that was, out of the rubble of that, life broke everything that didn't serve me. It broke all of the parts of me that would, like, my yearning would mean that I would gloss over my instincts. And in the aftermath, as I put myself back together, it meant that every step that I took and every bit of territory that I built back was of wisdom. So that, for me, that period was when baby Gina died and wise Gina started to emerge.
You're not alone. Many women go through that. And I thank you for sharing that, the honesty, because I think so many women can see parts of themselves that have fallen for the con man. Might not have been Grayson, but everyone has their own Graysons in some part. And interesting that it's often in the 20s and the 30s. It takes your heart has to learn to toughen up a wee bit. Yeah,
and also I think it's not even for me that the heart needs to toughen up. It's that we need to learn to listen to our instincts. It's that thing of, like, there's our yearning for connection, which as women is often really strong. And so someone who is unscrupulous or just unconscious can come along and say, here, I will give you this. And they might even believe it when they're saying it. And we go, oh, that's it. This is the answer. This is the bit where I get to feel complete. And even though the wolf in our belly, the wise part of us is going, and our friends are all going, no, 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 no. We're like, no, but this is going to be great. And he's saying it's going to be fantastic. And he just, he got hurt as a kid, which is why he's being X, Y, Z. Or, we make excuses for the behaviour, and we contort and we contort and we contort ourselves into these shapes where we are so contorted and we've given so much of ourselves away that we've lost the power of critical thinking. And so often we have to take ourselves to disaster to break ourselves completely, to then out of those ashes, our instincts can then start to be the wisest voice in our ear.
You started, to pay your debts actually, you started doing things like massage and using your hands again, touching. You talk in the book about how important it is that you became you were safe for them. And you met a whole lot of probably crazy people. In the meantime, you were doing famous people in hotel rooms and the rest of it. But was that you putting your life back together, starting to hear yourself and become one with yourself again?
Absolutely. So in the aftermath of my, disastrous decision to love and throw myself into the life of this con man, I ended up, drastically in debt. And I can remember having a moment of analysis, saying, okay, like all of the rose-coloured glasses have now smashed. This is my life. No one's going to get me out of this but me. How am I going to do this? And I was very analytical. It's like, okay, I've got these, I've been trained at university to be a journalist and PR in advertising. Could I do that? And that was such a no in me, like that lifestyle, especially then, was a no. And then I was like, well, could I do crime? Is that something that I could do? And then I just my heart wouldn't let me do it. I couldn't live with myself with those decisions. But it was a real question. It's like, could I do that? Could I do sex work? No, I can't. It's just not something, without judgment, for people who do. But for me, it would be disastrous for me to do that. And then I remember looking at my hands, and they're big hands and they're strong hands and they're intelligent hands. And I was already working in 5-star hotels a couple of shifts a week doing massage. With many famous people actually, and I can remember just looking at them going, oh, these hands are smarter than I am. This is my way through. And so I started my business with 45 cents in the bank and a debt that was basically probably the equivalent of 400 grand. And at 27 years old.
In the book you just say a small apartment.
Yeah.
But that really speaks to it.
It's the equivalent of that. And at 27 or 28 and going, okay, I can do this. This is something I know I can do. And so I went to the local printing company and said, because I had no money, said I need business cards. I think they were $100, which for me was 10,000. Yes. And I said, but I don't have money, but I can give you a massage. And I put my thumbs in his shoulders and he went, oh yeah, okay, let's do your 4-colour and gloss. Yeah. And so that got me business cards, and then I just started talking to everyone and putting my fingers in their thumbs in their shoulders, and they would book in. And within a week, I had 20 hours a week, and then I just didn't stop. I just worked and worked from 6:30 in the morning till 11 at night, 6 days a week, hands on bodies. And in the great thing about body work is that you become present. Nothing else exists. It's miserable. If you're thinking about being somewhere else, it'd be miserable. So my entire attention would focus on the body that my hands were on, and the dance of tissue and the release of that. And then all of a sudden, 10 hours would be gone, and I would have some cash, and I'd be able to pay this particular loan installment. And it taught me work ethic. I worked my way through, but in the process I developed the 10,000 hours of skill that it takes to have mastery. So I became really good at what I did. And so people kept on booking in, and it became a life.
So here you are in, the sandy beaches of Sydney, When did the wilderness start calling you back?
Wasn't long after all of that. I had a surgical event that nearly killed me, and in the aftermath of that I knew I had to get away from Oxford Street, I had to get away from that lifestyle, I had to get away from the unconsciousness of that, I had to get away from drugs, just had to get away from everything, and I ended up on an island in far north Queensland working harder than I've ever worked in my life. But it was chop wood, carry water. It was so simple, and it was this amazing wilderness paradise. There was no electricity, there was no water. We had to desal or use rainwater. We'd catch the food out of the ocean every day to feed the guests and ourselves, or we'd grow it in the orchard. And this really simple life of I won't even say subsistence, because it wasn't subsistence. It was beautiful. The food was amazing, and I remembered that part of me that as a kid didn't think it was any different to a horizon or a storm or a fish or a tree. And I feel like our disconnection and our civilization is such a veneer, but inside we all actually ultimately know that we're wild. Our DNA, 350,000 years of Homo sapiens, and 340,000 of those years we were hunter-gatherers. The majority of our DNA is hunter-gatherer wisdom, and it doesn't take much to scratch that off. So during my 30s, it was like that veneer came off, and I remembered that I'm actually so much more than my skin, and that the ocean flows through my veins, and that the stars fall from my eyes, and my bones are made of earth and dust.
Was it apparent, when you say the veneer came off? Did you start seeing things differently?
Absolutely.
Did you see the stars differently?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. And
it must be an incredible feeling.
It is. And because that was my life when I was a kid, it was more just the reawakening of something that I already knew, and that I had gone so far from. Like, I'd gone so far into this inner city strange lifestyle of nightclubs and
conforming
darkness, to then break that and emerge with a whole bunch of wounds and a whole bunch of scars, but to let the wilderness heal me. Yeah, I completely saw everything with brand new eyes, and wonder and love and gratitude.
You didn't really just break it, you kind of smashed the ceiling. Because then you decided you're going to go to the US. Tell us about that journey, because that kind of set you on the journey that you are now.
So in my late 30s, I did this thing where I would hear the name of a school or a person or a course or a class or something, and I would just know that I had to go. That was that instinctive voice. It'd be like I'd ring like a bell. Like, oh, and I wouldn't ask any questions. I would just do it. And I heard the name of this school called Tom Brown Jr.'s Tracker School. And as soon as I heard the name, I went, oh, that sounds like me. And but it wasn't yet. And then a year later, I heard it again. And this time, it was like the bell rang really loudly. And I said, oh, it's now. And then I looked at it online and was amazed, because it was this school based on the teachings of a Lipan Apache named, he was called Grandfather. And he had taught this redneck kid named Tom Brown everything he knew. And then Tom ended up starting this school in New Jersey, teaching the primitive survival skills, ancestral survival skills. And this school is just amazing. And once I looked at it online and saw all of the, like, what actually happened, learning how to make fire by rubbing sticks together, and camouflaging up and running through the bush and stalking each other, and how to make shelters that you could sleep in the snow with no clothes on. And so then I just had to go. So I just packed myself up and off I went.
What a gift of ancestral knowledge, that everyone gets to receive there. You met someone really special there.
On the first day. On the first day, I met this guy who was 12 years younger than me and cheeky, and he bounced up to me and was like, oh, you're an Aussie, are you? And I was like, yeah, Aussie as they come, and walked away, because I thought, I know your type. No. Cheeky and naughty, no. But then we sniffed each other's armpits. And the wolf won. Yeah. The wolf won. It was just one of those moments around a fire pit where we were talking about pheromones and about human smell, and I was saying how I really don't like.
You literally sniffed his armpit.
I literally sniffed his armpit. Yeah.
Just checking for the audience.
No, I literally sniffed his armpit.
And it was good.
And it was like,
so then that was
and then it was just a matter of time. And it was funny because my cognitive function, my cognitive facility was saying no because blah 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 blah. But when we had this conversation about scent and pheromones, and he lifted up his arm and said, "I got to know." I was like, "How do I?" Like, that's my kryptonite. So I sniffed his armpit, and then I was about to leave, and he said, "No, my turn," and he sniffed mine. And it's so monkey, it's so animal, but truly from that moment, I just went, "Oh no, it's just a matter of when."
And then you took him home, and your mum goes, "Oh my gosh,
yes,
what is she doing?"
Yes, so I brought him home. As I used to say to my friends, he followed me home, so I kept him. And took him to the first family Christmas, and he didn't cope very well. He was a wild thing. He'd been living in the bush in a teepee for a year at this school, and I brought him to Bondi, and people are like,
you thought he was going to love the surf.
Yeah, and it didn't work. It was like bringing a panther home and expecting it to just go down and hang out at your local cafe. It's like, no. It took a little while for him to learn how to be a human in a modern world, and we were brand new in a relationship, and and things got intense pretty fast.
Were you able to recreate some kind of an environment that you had in the US at the school in Australia?
I started up with Lee. I started up these rewilding camps called Rew Your Child, and so there's been these family camps running for about 12 years now, where we'll get, these days, it's 60 kids and their families all camping in the wilderness together, and every morning the kids go out with mentors and they learn how to make fire by rubbing sticks together, and they learn how to make shelters, and they make bows and arrows, and they just, there's no alcohol, there's no internet, there's no devices, there's no showers, people just jump in a river to swim, and the whole family, all the families come together every night under a longhouse without walls and sing songs in 3-part harmony, and I teach them these songs, and there's stories, and we have communal meals around the fire, and it's an amazing thing. Yeah.
Sydney didn't work out for Lee,
yeah,
but he worked out for you. So what was the next move?
Well, I got pregnant. I didn't think I could. I was 40 and I didn't think I could get pregnant, and suddenly I was, and then 4 days after I found out I was pregnant, I found out I had breast cancer, and I was told that I had to terminate the pregnancy or I'd die. It was then just this whirlwind of doctors and diagnoses and scans and being told that I had to terminate or I'd die, and having this wolf mother inside me say, no, there's a way. And so I followed her, and I followed that wisdom. And I thought, okay, I won't need to do any of the medical stuff. I'll just alkalize, I'll eat well. And none of those things were working, because the hormones of pregnancy were the same hormones that the cancer would feed on. And so my circulating tumour levels just went, and I ended up having chemo for 3 months while I was pregnant. So that just took, again, all of my attention and all of my awareness every day to be able to make those choices that wouldn't just impact my life, but also my unborn child's life and my husband's life and my family's lives. And everyone who wanted to keep me safe was saying, don't keep the pregnancy. And I knew there was a way to get her safely into the world.
You talk about that degree you got earlier on, the communications and the journalism. You're like, I was never going to do any of that. But I think somewhere in there you did do some journalism, because you said, bring me all the information
yes.
I need. And you did the research.
Absolutely.
And so while the normal pathway would be you have to terminate, mm-hmm. you were like, I'm just going to check that out myself first.
And I read every single study every single one where chemo was given to pregnant women back to, I think it was like the 70s. I read every single one. I made charts. I wrote down what those chemotherapy agents were. I wrote down the mortality rates for the mothers, for the children. I looked at their lifestyle choices as well. And at the end, I came up with 3 chemotherapy agents, and I just said, these are the ones I'd want. And my oncologist said, well, that's lucky because they're the ones I was going to give you anyway. So yes, I did do my research. It's not like I went, okay, I'm just throwing out the medical advice, but I just had to find that very narrow path where there could be medical intervention so that I could still keep the child, keep the pregnancy, and also treat the cancer. And so I had chemo for 3 months.
And then you had a miracle child.
And I had Blaze. Now, chemo babies are usually tiny. I think because the chemo affects dividing cells, they're usually around 1.5 kilos, so 3 pounds. Blaze was 4.5 kilos. She was 10 pounds in an hour and a half at 41. Like, let me tell you, this 41-year-old pelvis was not geared for an hour and a half labour with a 10-pound baby. And she was perfect. She came out, she was healthy, she was amazing. She was this miracle child. She was so intelligent, and her presence was staggering, to the point where I would think there was something actually wrong with other kids, because I'm like, this one's broken. It doesn't.
Perfect.
Just the other ones, just like where are they? I can't find them. Whereas she would just be like right there. And then for 3 years, we just had this beautiful, idyllic life, just living in the bush, and she talked to the birds.
Teaching.
And
See that there's images of you, with Lee with her on the hip, and
exactly.
you're teaching and just having the best life.
None of us wearing shoes, all of us just eating bush food when we could, growing veggies in the garden, having free-range guinea pigs, her knowing the names of all the birds and talking to them in bird language, which was what I used to do when I was a kid. And it was pretty beautiful.
And you would have thought that your heart had kind of had enough by that at that stage, but what happened next?
And then I found a lump in her belly, and anyone who's ever felt cancer in their own bodies, like I'd rolled my breast cancer lump around enough to know immediately that that's what it was.
Did you just touch her or feel it one day?
I saw that her belly was bigger than it. Like, because little ones have these pot bellies, but she was 3. And I remember thinking, her belly's too big. Come here and let me feel. And as soon as I felt it, I just went, oh, it was like a rock the size of my fist. Yeah. And I knew immediately what it was. And so off we went to the hospital and got the diagnosis, and it was a neuroblastoma. And they got it out, and
with surgery.
And they said, the margins are clear, the lymph nodes are clear, bone marrow is clear, go home, come back in 10 weeks. And in those 10 weeks, 200 tumours grew in her body, and she died. Yeah, she died.
Can I get you to, because this is what I love about your book, is that you write poems all the way through it. And I wondered if you read this one here. It actually just says everything about you, how your connection to animals and to the environment.
Bow! This is the song of the wolf mother, howling at the fell moon. Not cold, yet to me she seems so. Cold as my little one's lips, as the marble forehead I kissed 1,000 times, as the limp body I nudge with my long nose. Get up, get up! No life hides there. I long to be a stone, plunging end over end into the cool deeps of my grief. Lie still at the bottom, darkling, untouched by time or tide. Against my urges, life bears me up and out. I pop and bob in the frothy margin, the sunlit slice between ocean and air, sea and sky, huge as tangled mountains, vast as galaxies. Over and over I fill, breath after breath, each larger than the last, each one a rain of blessings, each one the whisper, the shout of her name.
Kia ora, thank you so much. I think for any mother or woman, grandmother, sister, auntie, father actually, it's no one would ever know what it was like to lose a child. At the time when Blaze passed, were what were your thoughts about how your heart was going to cope?
Yeah.
Do you think like that? Do you think, shit, how am I going to get through this? Am I going to be okay, or am I not?
Yes and no. It was more actually, are Lee and I going to be able to get through this? That was the main thing. So this really beautiful thing happened when I realised that she was going to die. The moment that I realised that she was going to die, it was that, like you say, the visceral mother part just went, no, I can't be with this, I can't think about it, this is just a no. And every cell wanted to crawl off my body. And then that wise voice, which has now become so much an ally and so much a part of my life and my internal reality, that wise voice rose up and basically said, is she a gift? I said, well, yeah. Well, if she's a gift, then everything is part of that gift, even this. And if you're going to say yes to her gift, you need to say yes to all of it, even this.
Even the loss.
Even this, because it's all from her, and I got it, not as a cognitive thought, not as a logical thing, but as a visceral ka-chunk. And I never wanted to reject any part of her gift. So I said, I get it, okay, yes. So I said yes to the hospital, I said yes to what was going on, and when it was time to let her go, I said yes to that. And then when she flew away, I said yes to that. And then when it was time to grieve, I said yes to that. And it's 11 years now, and every single day I've really asked, what is grief asking of me? And sometimes grief wants me to have a tantrum, and sometimes grief wants me to smash all the plates, and sometimes grief wants me to make love, and sometimes it wants me to laugh and go and see some silly movie, and sometimes it wants me to doom scroll, and sometimes it wants me to eat chocolate, and sometimes it wants me to just look out and stare at the clouds and hear her voice on the wind. And whatever grief asks of me, I say yes. And because of that, I can say that having her was the greatest gift of my life, and losing her was the second greatest. Because of losing her, I am bigger and wiser and stronger and more kind and more present and more capable and more compassionate. So in a way, I am her gift in the world.
That's beautiful. Not everyone deals with grief like that,
No.
like like the boss woman that you were. And in a way, when you consider your relationship, you lost twice.
Yeah.
That's unfair.
Yeah. Yes, it is unfair, but I don't have the idea of life being fair. I mean, life doesn't care. It doesn't, the universe isn't invested in giving me the life that I think I want.
There's a great lesson for me. Thank you for that.
Yeah. Well, that's how it is for me, because if I start to want things to be fair or unfair, I'm going to be sad. Whereas if I see that life out in nature, life is hard, and things die, and things are born, and things rot, and things grow from them. And so for me, it's more, can I be with the capital R reality of what's in front of me? And if I can do that, and for me that means then my child is gone. The next part is then that my husband, who was 12 years younger than me, wanted to be a dad again, and I couldn't. I couldn't give that to him, and that was his heart's desire. So we went our separate ways so that he could follow that. And is it fair? No. Do we owe each other anything? No. If I love him, if I truly from my heart love him and want him to have what he needs in the world, how can I hold on to someone who's going to be then miserable to stay with me to make me feel better? It's just that's not capital R reality. So I let him go. I'm not saying it was easy, but I let him go, and now I'm godmother to his two beautiful daughters, and we still run our camps together, and he's still one of my best friends. I find myself saying, when I get out of here, I'm going to ... So when I get out of here, I'm going to take my friends out to dinner. And when I went out on Alone Australia, and they said, all right, if you win, you need someone to come and tell you that you've won, because that's how you know you've won. Something like, Alone Australia, is someone you love jumps out from behind a bush and says, surprise, you've won. And that's how...
You're has to be him.
It was him. It had to be him. Because where he and I have gone together is to the absolute bottom of the pit and back out again. And whatever you might think a relationship needs to look like. We have had the darkest of times, not just to do with Blaze, like with each other, but we've always turned up with honesty and self-reflection and taking responsibility for our part. And so as a result, there is a bond and an intimacy that I value above, you know, most of the other relationships in my life.
When you started this book and you had those early conversations with your mum, Suzanne, and she tells you one day that you're going to meet your people, is this book for your people?
Absolutely. Absolutely. The beautiful thing for me is coming from being an absolute outsider with no friends. I have gradually built communities. So there was the queer scene in the 90s, but then the rewilding communities in the camps. I'm a camp mama. That's what everyone calls me, camp mama. I don't have my daughter. I have hundreds of kids. Camp mama! And they come running up and they jump into my arms, and the kids, like, I've watched these kids grow up. So now they're teenagers and mentors, or they've grown up and they're having their own kids. I have I'm a 5 rhythms dance meditation teacher, and I have a community that's over the whole world of dancers. When I won Alone, 5.5 million people watched it, and they come and they find me in the street and we have instantly real conversations, and I feel like I have 5.5 million new friends. And now with this book I get to communicate to everybody how much I love them, because this book is a love story. It's a love song. It's a love song to life, and it's a love song to connection, and it's a love song to all the things we all go through, the loss and the love and the joy and the grief and the confusion and the numbness and the grit and the grace, which is part of all of us. And what I want to do in this book is just provide the magic carpet so that we can see that we are more than our stories. We're more than our projections and our beliefs and our hurts, that ultimately we're connected to something so vast and beautiful and wonderful that when we can kind of relax into that connection, we can get nourished by every single strand of the web, and ultimately realize that we are actually made of stars.
I was going to end on that, because scientists say the human body contains elements that we were made in the stars. And here in New Zealand, Māori also believe that a star called Taramainuku casts his net at the end of each day and hauls the souls that have passed. And during Matariki, which is the middle of the year, he takes those souls and he turns them into stars. So from the get-go, the title of your book kind of got me, We Are the Stars. What's behind the title?
Exactly what you just said. You got me. Yeah, it's just what you just said, and just what I just said, that we are so much more than we think we are. And when we go outside and we look up, we can see physics. You know, we can see a dance of atoms, or as our ancestors and our ancestors' ancestors and our ancestors' ancestors' ancestors have done for hundreds of thousands of years, we can look up and we can see that we are part of a universe. We are a speck of dust in an expanding universe, and in that, while nothing is important, everything matters. And while nothing matters, everything is important. And ultimately, we are made of stars.